So if you've been around for a bit, you probably actually see me do a live reading of this article, and I'm probably will have a version of it uploaded to Tumblr, um, and Substack, and I've decided to do a more like controlled environment by reading it here, and then I'm gonna edit it together later so it's more organized. So I'm just gonna get it right into it. I'll probably edit in a better intro later. So. Spoilers for Hunter x Hunter up to the latest chapter, Chapter 410, as well as spoilers for the 2011-1999 anime. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can come back to reading this later. This version of the article that you are reading is actually the second version, as pointed out by several people on Reddit. In the original article, I conflated the terminologies of Hatsu and Nen abilities at several points. Hopefully with this article I can clear that up. As mentioned before, I do plan on making a video/audio version of this article at some point. Intro. So, you're probably wondering what's up with the title, since I'm probably not going to go in depth about any one specific ability in this article. Well, this episode was originally going to be about Kurapika and his Nen abilities, how they work and how they metaphorically represent the character, because the way Togashi uses Nen and the respective abilities that can come with it to tell us about the characters and who uses them, their personality, and their place in the story is actually done a lot and very well. But I realized when I started writing the Kurapika article, I sounded completely incoherent. Plus, I kept having to repeat certain ideas or concepts over and over, which left me wondering how much time I would be wasting explaining information or my thought process on each article. So, like with my MTG Color Pie articles, which I am still working on by the way, in addition to the TMA article on the web, I decided to make a general video explaining some of the overall and commonly occurring concepts and distinctions, as well as some common misconceptions before having future articles focus on more individual people or things. Nen has a lot of misconceptions and speculation that are mistaken for fact. I also have my own speculations or assumptions about Nen, but I will try to be clear about when something is conjecture and give the reasoning and or sources. The other thing I noticed is a lot of Nen explanation videos leave me wanting. There are some good videos out there, like one by Nen will review, but a lot of them lack some serious information, don't talk about the symbolism, don't have as many sources, and just don't dive into the nitty gritty as much as I would personally like. Now, will my article cover everything? No. Partially because of the fact that we are still being told new stuff about Nen as the story of Hunter x Hunter continues, and partially for the sake of time and to avoid confusion. We'll also focus on just Nen and not really how it's handled in society, so things like how the Hunters Association tries to keep it secret and the bylaws regarding Nen are for another time. Aura itself. Now I know a ton of people are probably here to hear about the various Nen categories, but I want to try to start more generally before working my way down to more specific things. Cards on the table, yes, I will be using the Hunter x Hunter fandom Wikipedia to point me in the right direction, but I will also look for the exact chapters the information is mentioned, and I will try to include them as references for you guys. So Nen, what is it? Some of you probably already have an answer. Nen is the life force used as fuel for the super cool Nen abilities and magic system of Hunter x Hunter. This is technically incorrect, if you want to be pedantic about the official terminology. According to Wing in Chapter 47, the term Nen actually refers to a technique/martial art that allows one to manipulate the aura that comes out of their body. So, what's being used to fuel all the supernatural abilities is aura, but how this aura is actually controlled and utilized is through Nen. This is also why the terms ordinary person, non-user, and non-Nen user exist. Technically everyone has aura, as it is literally life force, because if you didn't have aura you would just die. However, not everyone can use Nen to harness this aura, and that's where the distinction begins to occur. As I just mentioned, every living thing has aura, and by extension the potential to use Nen, because aura is a life energy produced by all living things, including animals. Aura exits the body from various points known as aura nodes. Normally, aura is completely invisible, even if certain effects such as Melissa's intent can be felt, or certain Hatsu, Nen abilities, and supernatural effects can sometimes be seen by anyone, including non-users, especially when using conjuration abilities to create tangible objects. By default, aura slowly leaks away from the body. The best way to visualize aura would be as something like a gaseous steam, which is kind of how it is represented in the anime and manga anyway. For most people, Nen uncontrollably slowly leaks out of the body by stemming off the top of their head, like a bit of steam leaking out of a teapot. But by using Nen, especially 10, one can regulate their aura and keep it from leaking away. This comes with the benefit of also reducing the rate at which one ages, while greatly increasing their base strength, making them stronger than non-users by default. This layer of aura acts as a layer of protection against the Nen/aura of others. While Nen is normally invisible, it becomes visible to people once they open the aura nodes in their eyes, allowing them to see it. The same rule about being able to actually see Nen appears to apply to video recordings of it too, as seen in Chapter 56 when Wing and his students review the video of Hisoka's fight with Castro by using Gyo to see aura hidden with Hisoka's in. What in and Gyo are is something I'll explain later, but just know that this shows Nen in videos and probably pictures seem to abide by the same rule of visibility as seeing Nen in person. There are two main ways to learn Nen. The first is the most common and safest through simple practice and proper meditation. However, this is by far the slowest way to learn Nen. Zushi, who is a natural prodigy, is said to have taken 6 months to learn the basic technique of 10, as stated by Wing in chapter 48. This is considered fast, by the way. Most people take at least a year to learn the proper basics of Nen. According to Solkov in chapter 402, it took him an entire year to get to the level of using Zetsu while multitasking when doing something like running and playing a game, despite having been able to use the technique from birth. However, if you are in a bit of a time crunch, there is a second way to learn how to use Nen, but this can be extremely dangerous and is not recommended, so much so that most consider it taboo. This method is dubbed initiation or baptism, depending on the specific translation you are using, and it involves forcing the nodes of one or more people open with a sudden influx of external aura. We have seen this happen both intentionally and by accident. Wing famously gives Killua and Gon a burst of aura to force their nodes open in chapter 48. We also see Gon and maybe Killua accidentally initiate the Chimera Ant remote after the latter managed to survive a blow from one of Killua's thunderbolts and Gon's Jajankan rock attacks before being whisked away by Colt in the events of chapter 191 and chapter 194. As mentioned previously, initiation is considered extremely dangerous, and intentionally using it to teach someone Nen is frowned upon and considered taboo. According to Wing in chapter 48, the reason for this is because anyone who has malicious intent or simply lacked the right amount of experience could potentially just kill or maim the person they are trying to initiate, accidentally or purposely. And we have encountered people who have lost entire limbs or become crippled due to the effects of a Nen attack / initiation, Gido, Sadaso, and Ryavolt specifically. So we know it's very, very possible and easy to become permanently / seriously injured / or crippled or mutilated from an improper initiation. In Heaven's Arena, Nen using participants of the arena will typically practice initiating those who can't use Nen once they reach the 200th floor, often leading to serious injury or death to those that cannot already use Nen. However, that's not where the risks actually end for this method. On top of all this, once your aura nodes are opened, you don't immediately know how to control your aura flow, and you need to quickly learn to invoke 10 or else your aura will just pour out of your body from every open aura node. And since aura is your life energy, if too much of it escapes, you'll become so tired you can't even stand up, according to Wing in chapter 48. It should be noted that while initiation is referred to as an attack, not all forms of initiation take the form of such. The one Wing provides Gon and Killua is known to use a more gentle aura when compared to the likes of Lumi's Nen. We also know even supportive abilities can act as a form of initiation. For example, Kurapika's Stealth Dolphin causes the non-users who are loaned an ability to be initiated. The term attack tends to be used universally as a way to discourage its use, as Kurapika explains in chapter 388. Kurapika even clarifies that an initiation can be achieved through the use of healing or support abilities, not just literal attacks, and we see other characters such as Babiminya and Furika speculate about the use of manipulation to force aura nodes open. However, they also note that in those cases, Nen users would normally be able to see or detect the aura the manipulator in question has infused into the initiate. Kurapika's Stealth Dolphin seems like quite an interesting form of initiation, since after Queen Oito was temporarily given a Nen ability by the technique, she later asked Kurapika to teach her Nen, but Kurapika reveals that she was already awakened to it without even realizing, as seen in chapter 369. Something that seems a lot less likely to happen if you got initiated from Gon sucking you in the stomach or something. This could imply more subtle forms of initiation, or just Oito and Kurapika being more talented, but I'm going to leave any potential specifics regarding that to Kurapika or Oito's respective articles, because I want to stay on track here. I'm not sure if this really counts as its own category of Nen Awakening, but I decided to cover it in its own little subcategory because I find it distinct enough. Within the Hunter x Hunter world, there are also people known as Nen Geniuses, a term that refers to people who subconsciously control their aura, master techniques, create Nen abilities, or use certain forms of Nen, even if they lack formal or conscious training and knowledge. Wing says that in chapter 48, people that can use Nen, including these geniuses, are often regarded as superhuman, geniuses, gifted, etc. While it would be easy just to come to the conclusion that there are only two states of being when it comes to being able to use Nen, those who are Nen users and those who aren't, it's pretty apparent that this state of awakening exists on more of a spectrum. There are those who can and can't use Nen, but there exist states in between these that are referred to with terms like half-awakened or semi-awakened, in which some of the user's aura nodes are open properly, but not all of them. This can lead to people who have some control over their aura, unique Nen abilities, or have a higher amount of aura to pull from than the average person, but they are unable to see or sense aura in the same way that someone who is fully awakened to Nen would be able to. We see an example of this in chapter 372 from two Halkenberg's bodyguards that ended up in a state of half-awakening due to the effect of the 9th Prince's Nen beast. They had a lot more aura than normal, so they were mistaken for Nen users, but they did not seem like they knew how to control their aura in the same way as someone who went through the proper training would. They also still had the signature stem of aura flowing out from the top of their heads that non-users tend to have. However, they seemed like they were able to learn Nen and how to manipulate their aura much faster than normal, probably because they were already part of the way there thanks to the semi-awakening. It is mentioned in moments throughout the story that certain forms of manipulation can be used to fully or partially awaken someone to Nen by forcing aura nodes open or closed for whatever reason. But we'll try to save more of that talk for when we go over the Nen categories. Also, according to Longi in chapter 401, if a baby becomes awakened to nen in some way, such as by a psycho dad putting a curse on them from the moment of their birth, they will instinctively and naturally learn ten and zetsu as a way to reduce fatigue. As mentioned previously, all living things have aura, which means all living things have the hypothetical potential to use nen. The clearest example of this would actually be the chimera ant Mentupi, Yupi for short, who despite his humanoid appearance and mannerisms is said to be made without a single drop of human genetic material, as we see mentioned in chapter 266. As explained by Wing in chapter 56, nen tends to be heavily connected to the practitioner's own character, so just attempting to copy the nen abilities of someone else would not always reach the same result or level of efficiency, even if there would be specific instances where someone could reach such a goal. Aura can also be used to convey emotion and intent, as we have seen on several occasions. One of the most notable ways in which this is done is by imbuing it with malicious or hostile intent to create a palpable force that can actually seriously harm those that cannot use nen, or those without proper protection such as ten in a physical and or mental sense. It is noted by Wing in chapter 48 to have been physically painful for Gon and Killua to endure hostile intent without ten. We have also seen people like Killua describe Wing's nen as a lot less malicious and more gentle when compared to someone like Illumi. Due to how strongly aura is tied to nen, one's aura output or nen capability can spike or change in response to strong emotion. This can come with the risk of straining the user or other such drawbacks. Tying into nen and aura's connection to emotion, there is post-mortem nen. Despite being powered by life force, some nen abilities or effects can actually become stronger upon the death of the user. The most common reason for this happening is because of a powerful emotion, like a powerful grudge, being present in the user when they die, causing their aura to seek out the source of their hatred and cling to it, as explained by Finks in chapter 120. Post-mortem abilities fueled by negative emotion and the death of the invoker tend to be extremely hard to remove. There are those known as exorcists who have the ability and skills needed to remove nen curses, but they are extremely far and few between. Even more so when it comes to those capable of removing curses set by those who are now dead. Finks states that the number of those who can remove curses left by the dead can be counted on one hand, but the wiki states there are 10, and I still need to find a source for the wiki's claim. However, I was able to find more else, seeing the Hunters Association has a grand total of 1 exorcist among their ranks in chapter 325. So the point stands that nen exorcists are extremely rare and hard to come by. Not all post-mortem nen abilities are necessarily malicious or only take the form of curses though. The GU family are aided by Misha Hao's post-mortem nen ability, one which aids in the inconspicuous disposal of corpses from any victim killed by the GU family, the act of controlling the deceased body to make it seem like a murder didn't just occur in public before moving the body to a location where it can be disposed of safely, as seen in chapter 392. So, post-mortem abilities can take the form of blessings and or curses along with more neutral manifestations. Sometimes a user's death can act as a condition or requirement for an ability to work in order to make it much more powerful or effective than it otherwise would be. As mentioned previously, aura is present in all living things, which means being able to use nen and interact with aura allows for connections or attunement with nature and various living things. There is a common belief that good hunters are well liked by animals, most likely because of their connection to nen and aura, and wild animals are implied to often have a greater sensitivity to aura generally. Some people and animals can also spontaneously learn zetsu, and human babies who are initiated will instinctively learn and use ten and zetsu to keep their aura from leaking away. In chapter 186, Kite notices that Killua and Gon are using their skills with nen to quote, become one with nature and more in tune with it, unquote, and use their 5 senses to catch things a non-user would otherwise miss. This association with nature also makes sense when you consider that aura can be used to convey intent, so someone with nen would probably have an easier time conveying when they are not upset or harboring no malicious intent to wild animals. Before we finally get to some of the more flashy nen techniques and skills, I think it's important to cover nen and its relation to genetics and even gender. It is implied that skill or potential with nen can be passed down. The Zoldyck family all appear to be powerful nen users, especially Killua and his father along with his grandfather. Ging and his son Gon are both powerful nen users, and Beyond is a top tier nen user just like his father. Things like this could just be a mere coincidence or the product of other factors, such as training being passed down, but I would be extremely surprised if that is the case, even if it doesn't seem like being the descendant of a powerful nen user guarantees you'll be a nen god, and being the child of someone who doesn't know nen doesn't seem like it automatically damns you to a fate of nen mediocrity. There are certain aspects of nen that seem innate, such as one's nen type, but a lot of these factors are a mystery or can vary, such as when influenced by strong emotions. We see that with characters like Gon and Killua that people can have the same amount of potential or skill, but excel in different aspects of nen. For example, Gon is noted as having more raw power and aura, but Killua more finesse and control with aura, as noted by characters like Bisky, who compares Gon to a diamond and Killua to a sapphire in chapter 139, using this metaphor to interpret how they are different personality-wise and excel at different things. In chapter 141, Bisky also states that Gon has a better concentration and recuperation, but Killua has better analysis and fundamentals. Potential, however, does not guarantee someone will become a powerful nen user if they lack proper training or discipline. One can also have their nen growth stunted by spending too much time training in the wrong nen categories, for example, as we see with Castro in his fight against Hisoka during chapter 54. However, despite the conclusion this could lead one to having, Nen and Or do not appear to be sexually dimorphic in any way despite how certain characters may talk about it. For example, Kurapika notes that male enhancers are more likely to have combat-oriented abilities in Chapter 388, and female enhancers are more likely to have supportive or healing abilities. But in Chapter 386, the bodyguard Babiminya confirms that Nen talent has nothing to do with sex/gender or physical capability in response to Kurapika going out of his way to teach a smaller-sized woman Nen first as a way of showcasing this aspect of it. The best example for what Babiminya is talking about would probably be characters like Bisky. Even Bisky's smaller form, she was capable of overpowering a full-grown man that might be like twice her size, such as Benno in Chapter 137, despite her smaller frame and stature. Her true form is also much bigger with an absurd amount of muscle, physical power, and strength granted to her by her training. So what gives? Well, Nen and Or are heavily connected to the mind, and sometimes things like certain restrictions or rules can occur in one's Nen based on their own biases, intuition, and/or personality. Objectively, based on what we know, a female enhancer could be just as powerful as any male enhancer, for example, but the conditioning of society could affect their own personality and biases. If a woman is convinced she cannot ever overpower a man, or that women are naturally weaker but faster, then her Nen ability is more likely to reflect this, and vice versa for a man. But this is a pretty extreme example though. More subtle examples would be things like occupation or culture. Things like combat are less likely to be seen as ladylike, and some cultures associate femininity or womanhood with support or domesticity, which would encourage more supportive or less conflict-oriented abilities. However, the opposite can be the case for men, with the clearest example being Prince Benjamin's private army being entirely composed of men, and men being more likely to be associated with modern military and thus put into environments where they are encouraged to make combat-oriented Nen abilities. So yes, it is at least implied that a woman could be just as physically strong as Uvagen or Netero using Nen, and it is only mental blocks, personality preferences, or biases that would prevent this from being the case, not inherent biological ones. And even Bisky doesn't have a combat-oriented Hatsu. Her Hatsu takes the form of Cookie, and who can do things like, make you feel less tired and help with skincare. So Nen, Or, and Nen categories do not discriminate between genders nor operate with any kind of wheel of time-esque power system or logic amongst men and women. Although, despite what I said at the comments about Netero being in his prime during the events of the Chimera Ant arc in Chapter 202 are true, then age does seem to be a factor with Nen. And as you get up in years, you will pass your prime and become weaker in some ways. And it's possible Netero is playing up this decrease in strength in some ways given some of his jokes.
A dubious little creature getting up to mischief. This is no good.
Although, to me, this could potentially make sense since Aura is life energy, so it's possible that when you start getting really, really old, you have less life force. But this is just speculation on my part on why this might be the case.